kitchen. So over the past few months we have been experiencing some amazing summer weather in the UK, so I thought I would do a very summery themed cake for you today. So I'm going to show you step by step how I made this bucket and spade cake. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing that I'm going to do is actually work on the bucket. So all I've got here is I've baked 3 vanilla sponge cakes. Now these are about 1.5 inches in height each, and I've just leveled these off. Now these 3 cakes have been wrapped in plastic and have been in the fridge overnight. The reason that I did that is just to firm them up slightly so that we're able to cut into them. But once they return to room temperature, they will remain quite light and fluffy in texture. So before I build the cakes, the first thing that I'm going to do is actually carve the cakes into the bucket shape. Now these cakes are 6 inches in diameter. This is just a round cutter that measures 4 inches, and all I'm going to do is use this as a guide. So if you can imagine, the top of this cake is actually going to be the bottom of our bucket. So the bottom is going to be slightly smaller in diameter to the top, and the sides are just going to taper down. So I'm just going to place that cookie cutter in the center of the cake and just push down slightly just to give me a guide. I'm then just going to use a serrated knife, and I'm just going to cut from that smaller circle down to the edge at the bottom. Okay, so we've got our upside down bucket shaped cake, and all I'm going to do is start to fill it. So I've got a batch here of milk chocolate ganache. Now ganache is just double cream mixed with chocolate. Now if you haven't seen my chocolate ganache video, I will put a link in the description below so you can see exactly how I made this. The reason that I'm using ganache today is just because the bottom of my cake will be slightly smaller than the top, and ganache just firms up a little bit more than buttercream, so it will make it a little bit more stable. Now because I've carved the different layers and I want them all to fit back exactly where they are now, all I've got here is 3 cocktail sticks, and I'm just going to push 1 cocktail stick into my bottom layer and another cocktail stick into my second layer so that it is exactly above the one at the bottom. I'm then going to put another cocktail stick in my top layer, and all this means is when I take them apart, I know that these cocktail sticks should line up as I place them back together. So I'm just going to remove my top 2 layers and just fill that bottom layer with some chocolate ganache. Now we will be placing the cake around the right way once we've covered it with icing, but it's just a lot easier to work with it upside down at this stage. Once you're happy that all the cocktail sticks are lined up and your cakes are back in the right position, I'm just going to take those out so that we can cover the outside of the cake. I'm then just going to use my offset spatula and just work that chocolate ganache over the entire cake. Now our cake has had its first coating of the ganache. I'm just going to pop this in the fridge for around 10 to 15 minutes just so that the ganache can firm up, just so we can apply another thin layer before we cover it in icing. Okay, so now our bucket cake has been taken out of the fridge. I'm going to just work my way around and just add another coating of the chocolate ganache. Okay, so once you're happy with how your ganache is looking and the smoothness that we've got on there, I'm just going to pop this back in the fridge for another 10 minutes. So the next thing that I'm going to do is actually prepare my board ready for my cake to go on. So I've just got a 10-inch drum board here. Now I will be covering the cake board in something to look like edible sand, but I need something for that to stick to. So I've just coloured some icing or fondant in an ivory colour. That's just in case there's any gaps and you can see it through. So I'm just going to roll this out and then just going to run over that icing with one of my smoothing paddles just so that I know that it's flat. I'm then going to take my drum board and with a paintbrush I'm just going to pop a small amount of water just over that. I'm then just going to lay that icing over the top, smooth that out, and just using my pizza cutter, just run around the edge just to cut off any excess. I've then just got some gold ribbon just to run around the edge and stick on with some double-sided tape. So once our cake board is ready, I'm just going to pop this to one side until we're ready to add our cake. Okay, so I've taken my cake out the fridge and the ganache has gone fairly solid, so it's ready to cover in my icing. Now for my icing, I've just got this Renshaw J jade colour. And all I'm going to do just to prepare my cake for the icing, just to make it slightly tacky so that the icing will stick, I've just mixed some water with a small amount of icing sugar, and I'm just going to brush that on. So I'm then just going to pop my cake to one side just when I roll out the icing large enough to cover the cake. Once that has all been rolled out, I'm just going to bring my cake in and just drape it over the top. I'm then just going to use upward motions just to stick that icing to the side of the cake. Now, the reason that I'm using upward motions, if you haven't seen my video on how I cover a cake, is just because it applies less pressure to the edge because you're pushing the icing on rather than pulling the icing down. And once the cake is completely covered, I'm just going to take my pizza cutter and just trim off any excess. Using my plastic smoothers, I'm just going to go around the cake and just smooth out that icing. I've then just got my flexi smoothers and I'm just going to run these over the cake just to make sure that it's as smooth as possible. Okay, so now our cake has been covered. What I'm going to do is transfer this onto the board. Now, I want to flip this over. The best way to do this is to do it without touching it. So all I'm going to do is just pop a small amount of our chocolate ganache on the bottom of the cake. I'm then going to bring my cake board back in. I'm going to turn the cake board over, place my hand on top, and at the same time, I'm going to turn the whole cake upside down. I'm then just going to push my cake into place. So there we have our bucket sitting on our board, and now we're going to work on the bucket and spade itself. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is just work on the top of the bucket. So I just want to create a thin rim that goes all the way around the edge and just comes up slightly so that when we add our edible sand, it will just hold it in. So I'm going to take some more of the leftover jade icing, and I've just taken a piece of ribbon, just measured around the top of the cake so that I know how long I need to roll it out. Okay, so I've rolled out into a long flat strand, which is about 3 to 4 millimeters in thickness. And I'm just going to cut a strip. Now I want to get the edge very even, so I'm just going to use a ruler to cut it out. I'm then just going to pop a small amount of edible glue just around that top edge. I'm then going to roll up the icing so that it doesn't stretch too much when I'm applying it. And starting at the back, I'm just going to glue that border to the cake and join those pieces at the back. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do is add a handle for the bucket down the front. Now, all I've got here is some white gum paste, and the reason that I'm using this is just because I want it to hang. So if I was using normal icing, it may tear. So I'm just going to roll this out into a long, thin strand. Okay, so now I know that I've got it the right length. All I'm going to do is cut a thin strand, which is about 1 centimeter in diameter. I'm then just going to run my fingers along the edge of that just to smooth those down. I'm then just going to drape that on and work out the exact length that I want it, and just put a small mark so I know where to trim those off. I'm then just going to cut the corners off of the ends just to curve those. I'm then going to turn that over and just put a small amount of edible glue just on the 2 ends where I want to stick that to the cake, and just hold it until that has stuck nicely. I then just want to place a small plastic bolt on each side just so it gives the appearance that the handle would be able to move. So I've just got a tiny piece more of that white gum paste, and I'm just going to roll that out so it's quite thin. I'm then just going to take a tiny piece of cling film, and I've just got this circle cutter here. Now this is just an end to a little pot. Any kind of circle cutter will do. This one is just slightly smaller than 1 centimeter, and I'm going to push that into the gum paste. Now the reason that I'm using the plastic wrap is just because it will give it a nice curve on the edges. So I'm going to pick that up, and using the back of my craft knife, I'm just going to put a line in there just so it looks like a small plastic bolt. I'm then going to just pop a small amount of edible glue just onto the back of that, and then just stick that at the top of the handle, and I'm going to do exactly the same on both sides. So here we have the bucket so far, and the next thing that I'm going to work on is the spade that's going to be coming out of the top. So for the spade, I just want to make sure that I'm making it the correct size. So I'm just sketching out a picture of how big I think the spade should be, just so I can test it on paper up against the cake before I make it out of modeling paste. So I just want to make it look like it's just poking in there, and then we're going to cover this with edible sand. Okay, so for the spade, I've just got some gum paste here, which I've just coloured in this red colour. Now the reason that I'm going for red is just because I want it to contrast against the bucket. So I've got the Wilton bamboo cane. Now all I've done is just measure this against the spade's handle and make sure that there is not too much of the dowel to go into the cake to hold the spade up. So I'm just going to take some of that gum paste, and I just want to start to roll this out into a long thin sausage shape, and this is going to be the top part of handle. Now when it's at the desired shape, all I want to do is just using the template that I've drawn is make this top section. I'm then just going to take my craft knife and just cut that off with a small amount of excess. I'm then going to take the small amount of gum paste that I had left over. I'm then going to work out the length of the handle and just trim that down. I'm then going to pop a slit down the length of that gum paste. I'm just going to pop some edible glue onto the end of that dowel. I'm then just going to push that dowel into the gum paste. Just start to close that gum paste around our dowel. Okay, so once we have the handle, I'm just going to place that on my template and just cut off some excess here. Now I'm just going to do it at an angle, just because this is where the bottom of the spade is going to attach to. So I'm just going to take the end of the spade that I created earlier, and I'm just going to chop 2 sections off of that so that we've got this area that can attach to the stick. Now all I want to do is make sure that this top section is going to hold its shape. So I'm just going to take a cocktail stick and break that in half. I'm then just going to push that into the end one of the top halves, but without going all the way through, and do exactly the same to the other side. I then want to push these ends into the stick, and I'm just going to use some edible glue and just stick those 2 sections together. And I'm just going to use my pointy modeling tool just to push those 2 together and make sure that they have stuck. Okay, now just to cover the join, all I've done is just cut a flat triangle shape out of the gum paste, and I'm just gonna pop a small amount of edible glue onto the back of there and just pop that on top of the spade and just push that into place so that it looks like it's part of the spade design. Okay, so I've popped the handle so far to one side just to dry slightly, and I'm gonna work on the bottom part of the spade. So I've just got some more of that gum paste, and I've actually got a round cutter which is the same size that I have drawn on my template. So this is around 3mm in thickness, and I'm just going to cut that out there, and I'm just going to pull the edges out so that it's not as round, and just cut off excess that I won't need. I'm then going to take the gum paste again and just roll that out into a strip. Now all I want to do here is just create the rim around the edge, and I'm just going to glue this on to the edge to wrap around the spade section. Then just going to leave the bottom of the spade and the handle just to one side, just to firm up while we prepare the rest of the cake. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to work on is the edible sand. Now I'm going to use this to cover the board and also fill my bucket. So for this, I'm just going to use a digestive biscuits. Now these are the perfect shade for creating sand. So I'm just going to take a sandwich bag. I'm just going to put a few of the digestive biscuits into there and just seal it up. Now I'm going to leave a small gap at one end just because I don't want to squidge all the air out and it to burst. I'm then going to take my rolling pin and just roll over the top of those just to break them all up into fine pieces. Now once they look like they've all been broken up, I'm just going to open that bag and just tip those out. So I'm going to continue to do the rest of my biscuits. Okay, so now I've got quite a lot of those digestive biscuits broken up enough to cover the board and the inside of the cake. What I'm going to do is attach my spade. So we have top half and bottom half. So I'm just going to push my handle into my cake, and I'm just going to lean it back slightly just because I want the front piece that we created to sit against the piece that we cut out. And don't worry about what you can see from the back because we are going to cover that with sand. So once you're happy where the bottom piece is sitting, I'm just going to pop a small amount of edible glue just onto the back of this cutout area and just down the wooden stick and just pop that into place. If you do want it to be slightly more secure, then you can just use some of that extra ganache that we had before. Okay, so here I've got my digestive biscuits, which is going to be my edible sand, and here I've got some buttercream. Now all I've done is just make a batch of vanilla buttercream and colour it in the same ivory colour that I covered the board. So all I'm going to do is just pick up that buttercream and just smooth that onto the board, and I'm just going to pile that buttercream up slightly at the base of the bucket, just so that the bucket looks like sitting in the sand. Now the reason that I'm building it up with the buttercream rather than with the biscuits is because I want the biscuits just to stick to the buttercream so that if you need to transport the cake, they're not going to fall off. So once I've completely covered my base in the buttercream, I'm just going to use a spoon and just take that edible sand and just pop that all the way over the buttercream and just lightly push that into place. Okay, so once the board is completely covered, I'm going to cover the inside of the bucket. So I'm just going to take the same buttercream and just pop that all over the inside. And I also want to make sure that I go all the way up the back. So I just want to hide the stick. Okay, so once that's all covered with buttercream, I'm just going to do exactly the same as I did before and just spoon those biscuits or edible sand into our bucket. Okay, so once the bucket has been filled and the board has been filled, we are ready just to finish off the cake. So I'm going to clear up any excess biscuits and we're going to create some edible shells just to go around the edge. Okay, so to make the edible shells, all I've got here is a silicone mold that I've bought on the internet that has all these different shell shapes. And I also have some different colour icing or fondant. So I've got some white, some ivory, a slightly darker ivory and a grey. Now the reason that I want to combine all these colours together to make the shells is just to make them look a little bit more realistic, as shells are never one colour. So I'm just going to take some of each of those colours. Now I'm also just going to add a small pile of corn flour, and I've got a really fluffy brush here, and all I'm going to do is just dust that corn flour into the shapes that I'm going to use, and this will just allow the icing to release. And all I want to do is create a kind of marbled effect. So I'm just going to mold these together but without combining all the colours. I'm then going to take a small amount of the icing and just place that in one of the shell spaces. I'm then just going to turn it upside down and push that shell out. So as you can see, you've got all the different colours, which just makes it look very realistic. So I'm going to go ahead and create a few different shells and shapes to add to my cake, and this is just a perfect finishing touch just to make it look like your bucket is at the seaside. Okay, so now we have a collection of all of our shells. All I'm going to do is place them around the cake. So I'm just going to take my shells and just push those into the sand so that they hit the buttercream. Now on some of them, I'm just going to pop a small amount of buttercream on the back just so that it sticks on top. So here we have the finished bucket and spade cake. I really hope that you love this cake as much as I do and have enjoyed watching the video tutorial. If you have, then don't forget to give this video a like, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, then don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit the notification bell next to the subscribe button, and this will just alert you every time a new video is uploaded. I'll also put a link in the description below to all my social media so you can follow me there. Bye!